what that ultimately turns into is when you are a UX designer, your job is to give a voice to users from all backgrounds. And I say all backgrounds because what good is your product or your service if people are excluded from it or people can't access it? This is when we get into accessibility. This is when we get into equity, wanting to make sure that no matter, who it's for, everyone else is able to use it and access it as well. So how do we get there? We get there by asking the right questions. We want to know who has a problem and what is the problem. This is more so where you get into the research aspects of UX, where we're doing a lot of problem finding and trying to get a very clear picture of who has a problem and what the problem actually is. From there, we move on to how are we going to solve said problem? And then what is that solution actually going to achieve, right? So it's not just coming up with a solution, but what is the outcome of that? How is that beneficial? How is that beneficial to the business? How is that beneficial to the user? From there, we can get more into design and features, because now we're thinking about, okay, we have an understanding of how we're going to solve it. We know what solving this problem will do for the business, for the user. But what do we actually need to add, right? It could be adding features. It could be working on improving features to actually get to the point where you are reaching your objective. That pushes us into the next stage, which is what is it going to look like and how is it going to work? How is it going to function? So these are all questions that we are cycling through, thinking through, working through, and folding back over all the time. A really big word in UX is iteration, which basically just means we're going to be constantly going back, making small improvements, small incremental change. And ultimately, you're going to have times where you will loop back to any and all of these questions, and that's perfectly fine. As we're going through and asking the right questions is going to help us climb the ladder that I have on the right, because ultimately, we want to make sure everything that we're creating is meaningful. It's one thing for it to function, right? That just means it works. When we move up to usable, it means, okay, it's a step forward, a step upward from functional. People can actually, use it. It's not just necessarily just working. People are able to use it, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're comfortable using it. They could have issues with it. It could be buggy. There could be just things about how people use it that aren't working pretty well, or just doesn't make sense, right? So moving up a step from that, people get comfortable with it. We want to hang out in the delightful and meaningful space where people are actually enjoying using the product. And then when we get to meaningful, that means we're actually making a difference. That means we're actually making a change in people's lives by the work that we're doing. I have a question at the bottom of who can't use the ladder, because that reminds us to circle back to accessibility. I'm glad, Alicia, you like the metaphor, right? And then also thinking, okay, I'm using a ladder, but there are people who can't use ladders, right? A lot of times accessibility gets forgotten about and swept under the rug because we think about a very small subset of people who have very specific disabilities. But what it comes down to is everyone at some point in our lives will be situationally disabled, whether you just had your wisdom teeth taken out and you can't speak. So that changes how you can interact with your Alexa or anything that's going to take a voice command, whether you sprain your wrist and maybe you're not able to actually use your hand or do as much with your hands. No matter what interface we design, there are going to be situations in which people who are either permanently disabled or situationally disabled, their experience is going to change, right? So we have to think about that as well.